There it is.
Yay! Awesome. All right. Can you still hear us?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I turn the smartboard up?
Hang on 1 second. Okay, I'm gonna plug in the smartboard. Let me see if you can still hear me talk when I plug it in. How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can you turn it up, Cragen? All right, and
Volume test, please. Speak, sir.
say something.
Hello.
Hi. How art thou?
What?
So, welcome to Smithfield Selma High School. This is my honors world history class. Say hi, guys.
Hi. Hey.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, so what do you have to share with us? Tell us a little bit about you and what you do, and go ahead.
So I am a PhD student in history at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And what I'm researching right now is the interaction between the church and the state in the 19th century Scottish church. So I think what Lauren or Miss Casteen asked me to kind of share is a little bit about what historians do, kind of like day to day. So rather than doing that, maybe do you guys want to just ask me some questions?
Who has appropriate questions?
Can
I touch your beard?
No.
Did you hear that?
I don't think that we are technologically advanced enough to
Get to the screen.
Okay, I know. How is it living in Scotland?
Okay, did you hear that?
Hmm?
Jennifer asked, what's it like living in Scotland?
It's very similar to living in the U.S. So I'm actually from Georgia. I grew up outside of Atlanta, and the weather's a little bit cooler and it gets darker a little bit earlier in the winter, but otherwise it's pretty similar. It's pretty rainy in the winter months, kind of like Seattle, but yeah, the culture is definitely different. So they have their own kind of sets of values, sets of kind of societal norms. They definitely have an accent. They speak English, but they have a very strong accent. So there's a lot of similarities, but at the same time, there's a lot of differences.
Do you like it?
Yeah, I love it. It's a fun place to kind of spend a few years before I'll probably end up back in the States for my career, but it's fun to live here for now.
How's your research going?
So what?
How is your research going?
It's going well. So the PhD program in the UK is a 3-year program over and against a 7-year program, which is the PhD program in the US. So for my program, the first year is basically doing background research, reading secondary sources, kind of doing literature review. And then the final 2 years will be writing a piece of original historical research that is an attempt to kind of add a further voice to the field. So this first year, what I've been mostly doing is kind of surveying a lot of the secondary sources, reading a lot of what other people have said about this era, about these topics. And then I have a proposal to submit in about a month and a half. And after that proposal is submitted, what I'll do from then on is kind of write the thesis or dissertation chapter by chapter. And it's not so much page length. Like you're probably used to page length assignments in high school. The way they do it at this point is by word length. So we're looking for 80 to 100,000 words. So it'll end up being about 400 pages.
Who's on board for that?
Yeah.
I'm leaving now.
I do know.
Woo!
Not really.
I'm not gonna do that. You can't see it.
You can see the upstairs.
No, the edge is right here.
Yeah, there you go.
There's corner.
See? Corner.
Oh.
Corner.
They're on board for that, apparently.
Yeah.
His fingers are so
Corner.
chubby.
I needed.
All right, anybody else more appropriate questions?
Not Dakota.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
How long did it take you to grow out your beard?
Okay, appropriate question.
It is appropriate.
Go ahead.
Probably, I don't really know because I usually keep it shorter, then I just grow it out from time to time. But from clean shaven to now, it probably would take about 6 months.
Dang.
It's so sleek.
Baker's catching up.
Oh, I heard.
What else?
Josh is catching up.
Can I ask another beard related?
No. History or Reformation?
Reformation.
Go, Michael.
During the Protestant Reformation, did Europe's economy change at all?
Yes, and a lot of that was in response to the Reformation. So, following the Reformation, there was a series of religious wars, and as with every kind of international or national war, the economy of the nations involved will have to respond accordingly to those particular set of circumstances. So, the economies would have changed, but not necessarily in any kind of way that caused the Reformation. Rather, the Reformation and the wars that followed it would have caused
You can keep going.
the economy to change. So the short answer is they did change, and there was kind of in that era you did see kind of the beginning of a transition from feudalism to a more kind of pre-capitalist agrarian society. But for the most part, it still remained in a land-based economy. So it wasn't necessarily a lot of trading or a lot of industry. Those things didn't really happen until the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. But in as much as the Reformation caused international turmoil, the economies would have had to respond. So sorry if it's a circuitous answer.
Thank you for
I have a question.
answering that question.
Yeah, Leah.
What's your opinion on the John Huss case?
We yesterday, I think I told you, we put Jan Hus on trial for heresy, and they were very interested in my opinion about whether or not I thought he should have been tried for heresy. So they would like to know what you think.
I haven't read much about Jan Hus in a few years, but from what I remember, I think in the Bohemian context of that era, of course, which is kind of current day Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic, he would have been seen, of course, as a religious reformer or as a religious kind of radical. But at the same time, we have to understand that in that era, the church and the state were very much tied up in the same kind of power structure. So to revolt against the church had serious implications for the state. So the fact that he was tried for heresy, tried for sedition, and executed is not so surprising when you remember that in so doing, he was also posing a threat to the quote-unquote secular powers as well as the church powers.
Yeah, Josh.
Who is your favorite historic figure from Protestant Reformation / Renaissance, and why?
Can you repeat the question?
You can come up here, Josh. I don't think he can hear you from back there.
No, you didn't.
Come up. That's fine. Say it again.
Who is your favorite historic figure from Renaissance / Protestant Reformation, and why?
Oh man. I kind of like Erasmus because he was able to critique and also kind of just blatantly make fun of the power structures and the issues of the day, while at the same time not necessarily being a radical reformer. So on the kind of right, the conservative side of the spectrum, I like Erasmus kind of for being a balanced yet critical voice from within the Catholic Church. From the Protestant side, I probably have to say that my favorite kind of historical figure is, gosh, too many good ones. I like John Calvin a lot, who of course was the reformer in Geneva, Switzerland, who kind of the whole theological system of Calvinism was kind of named after him, and I like Calvin a lot because he his kind of big theological work is called the Institutes. It did a very precise and very, but at the same time, very ironic. So it wasn't necessarily like Luther or like other figures. It wasn't necessarily just a rail against the Catholic Church, but it was also kind of an explication of theology from before, in previous eras of the Catholic Church, looking back to the Church Fathers like St. Augustine, in order to ground his ideology of Reformation in history rather than kind of out of thin air. So I think Erasmus was fun because he was able to satirize or make fun of the power structures through his main work, which was called In Praise of Folly. But I also like Calvin, who was able to really engage with the theological, philosophical issues of the day by using the historical resources available to him from the Catholic history.
For Erasmus, can you give us an example of something he did?
Yeah, so again, like the most kind of notable thing he did was he wrote a satire, kind of a play document that made fun of the Catholic Church called In Praise of Folly. So, and he was such a he was kind of so respected and so established that he was not in as much danger from persecution. So that from that position, he was able to do that. Kind of, it was definitely bold, but it was also calculated. So, again, his main kind of, I think, influence or his main contribution to the Reformation was being a critique from within the Catholic Church, as well as being one of the primary humanists, or one of the people who looked back to Latin and Greek in order to establish a more linear ideology and philosophy based on what Greeks and Romans and the classical thinkers believed.
Thank you.
Cool. Did you have another one, Josh?
What is Iron Brew?
Josh wants you to talk about Iron Brew.
Have you ever had Iron Brew, Josh?
No,
No, he's
Never.
not.
not going to.
I talked about it a little bit,
I don't
but
want cancer.
I remember that it was a particular fondness of yours.
He's not going to
It
do that.
is a particular fondness of mine. I only have it like maybe once every 2 or 3 months because it's so potent. But I don't know. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's just very sweet. So it's not as, I think, American soft drinks like Coke or Dr. Pepper, or like you guys are from North, like Cheerwine. It's not as, those are more, I'm trying to think. Imagine you took like a half a can of cream soda, half a can of orange soda, mixed them together, added a tiny drop of bubblegum flavor, and then juiced it full of sugar.
Amazing.
Yeah, they said it sounds amazing.
Is there any potential side effects?
And they asked if you can send them some.
Please.
You can actually buy it in the international sections of all the U.S. grocery stores.
But isn't it
North Carolina, in Johnson County.
okay? They said that we're in Johnston County and we don't have international grocery stores here.
Yeah, you do.
All lies.
They said all lies, and then also I heard that the iron brew in the States is different because there's something in the British version that is a carcinogen or something.
I don't know. Ignorance is bliss when it comes to iron brew sometimes.
He's like, I don't know.
Okay. Any other questions for Professor Jones? Yeah, Michael.
During the Protestant Reformation and the Renaissance, did we start to see a separation of church and state, or did that come afterwards?
Really good question. I think you do start to see a separation of church and state, and you start to see explicit documents that for the first time, with kind of real influence, begin to explicate those ideals. So the best example of that would be the radical reformers. And the best example of the radical reformers in regard to that would be Minnow Simons, who founded what we now call the Mennonites. So the radical reformers and the Mennonites, or the Anabaptists, as they were also known, explicitly repudiated any kind of connection with the state and saw themselves as the pure church. So their famous document was called the Schleitheim Confession, and it outlined, I think, 6 or 8 tenets that they really held to, and a lot of those had to do with being very, very rigid in the way in which they understood themselves over and against the state. So you do, in that era, begin to see kind of more political theology and political outworkings of the idea that the church and the state should be separated, going against kind of the idea of Christendom, which had been around since about the 500s, when Constantine became a Christian and took Christianity as the Holy Roman Empire's official religion. So you begin to see Christendom, or that kind of system of church and state interaction, beginning to just crack in the Reformation, but the majority of the kind of breaks in that idea wouldn't happen until the Enlightenment and afterward into the 19th and even 20th century.
Thank you.
All right, Professor Jones, my battery's about to die, so I think we're gonna have to cut it short. But thank you. They're groaning. They would rather listen to you than me. But thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, see you guys.
All right, say bye.
That was awesome. Wait, you sit in that corner.
And
It wasn't.
Miss Casteen.
I have my hand up.
Miss Cassie, go turn the laptop, please.
I don't have my cord.
Depression.
I think I might have my cord.